Scientists are warning of a mini ice age by 2050, believing that the sun is about to enter a massive cooling cycle. According to a study by the University of California, San Diego, the sun will begin to have diminished magnetism, fewer sunspots, and produce less ultraviolet radiation starting in 2020. The event, known as the grand minimum, is reportedly triggered at random points by fluctuations in the sun's magnetic field and is expected to last for about 50 years. Researchers are comparing the sun's upcoming cooling cycle to the last recorded sunspot outage, which occurred over 300 years ago, a period known as the Little Ice Age.
Imagine it's the middle of winter in London, but this time the familiar damp chill has been replaced by biting Canadian-level cold. The Thames has frozen solid, traffic has ground to a halt under thick snow, and the idea of daffodils blooming in spring is a distant memory. Across Britain, farmland lies buried under ice, and the countryside is eerily silent except for the groan of frost. What sounds like a post-apocalyptic film set is a scenario climate scientists now warn is within the realm of possibility by the middle of this century. For decades, we have understood climate change as a story of warming, droughts, heat waves, and rising seas. But new research suggests that parts of Europe, including the UK, may face the opposite problem, a dramatic drop in temperatures driven by a potential collapse of one of Earth's most critical climate systems. At the center of this alarming prediction is the Atlantic Meridional Overturning Circulation, or AMOC, a vast conveyor belt of ocean currents that transports heat around the globe. The Gulf Stream is its most famous component, carrying warm water from the tropics northward, moderating Europe's climate and giving the UK its unusually mild winters compared to regions at the same latitude. Without this current, Britain's winters would be closer to those of Labrador or Quebec, regions known for snowstorms and sub-zero temperatures. For thousands of years, the AMOC has remained relatively stable, but scientists are increasingly concerned that human-driven climate change is pushing it toward a tipping point. The culprit is what experts have dubbed the cold blob, a patch of ocean south of Greenland where temperatures are dropping even as the planet warms overall. This phenomenon is tied to the rapid melting of Greenland's ice sheets and Arctic glaciers, which are pouring fresh water into the North Atlantic. Fresh water is less dense than salty seawater, and when too much of it floods the system, it disrupts the sinking of cold, salty water that drives the AMOC. In essence, the engine that powers the Atlantic's heat transport begins to stall. Research shows that the AMOC has already weakened by about 15% since the mid-20th century, and new modeling suggests the decline is accelerating. A study from the University of Copenhagen warns that the system could fail entirely as soon as the 2050s, and some even speculate an earlier collapse is possible. If that happens, the consequences would be staggering. Europe's climate would shift in ways unseen for tens of thousands of years. Winters could plunge by 10 to 30 degrees Celsius compared to today, a change so extreme that London could feel like Stockholm or even Siberia. Fields that now produce wheat and vegetables could become frozen tundra. A University of Exeter study has already estimated that if these shifts occur, Britain's arable land could shrink to just 7% of its current area, down from 32%. Food shortages would be inevitable, prices would soar, and governments could be forced to impose rationing and strict controls on agriculture. Riots over basic necessities would not be far behind. This is not just speculation confined to one research group. Climate experts across Europe are raising the alarm. Bill Maguire, a professor of geophysical and climate hazards at University College London, has been blunt. The AMOC is now failing. It may well be too late to stop its collapse. He points to the last time the AMOC shut down, around 115,000 years ago, just before the last ice age, as evidence that such events are part of Earth's history. But unlike then, this time the trigger is not a slow-moving natural cycle, but rapid human-induced warming. The irony is cruel. By heating the planet, we could freeze part of it. The collapse of the AMOC would not only affect Europe, because this system controls much of the world's ocean circulation, its breakdown would ripple through global weather patterns. Monsoons in Asia and Africa could weaken, leading to drought and famine in regions that rely on seasonal rains. North America's eastern seaboard could face faster sea level rise as water piles up along the coast. The Amazon rainforest could dry out further, and Antarctic melting could accelerate. Global trade, agriculture, and economies would reel under the strain of such changes. Still, not all scientists are convinced the worst-case scenario is imminent. Chris Brearley, a climate professor at UCL, notes that while the AMOC is weakening, full collapse is uncertain. Most models suggest a slowdown rather than a sudden stop, but we cannot rule out that the process has already started, he says. Other studies emphasize that the system may not fail overnight, but could go through periods of instability before a major shift. Yet even these more cautious voices agree, the trend is downward and the risks are real. Part of the challenge is that the AMOC is only closely monitored through a network of instruments that began in 2004. In climate science, that is an incredibly short window, and while changes are already visible, the data is limited. Researchers are racing to improve models, using everything from satellite observations to sediment cores to piece together a clearer picture. But time is not on their side. Greenhouse gas emissions continue to rise, ice sheets continue to melt, and every ton of carbon released makes the ocean a little fresher, and the AMOC a little weaker. What could Europe do if the worst comes to pass? According to Maguire, mitigation is no longer the priority, preparation is. Infrastructure would need redesigning for Arctic-like conditions. Homes built to withstand heavy snow, transportation systems adapted for ice. Energy grids capable of higher demand. Food security would become paramount, with indoor and vertical farming replacing open fields, and long-term rationing schemes possibly lasting generations. Governments might need to operate on a war footing, diverting resources to keep populations fed and warm. Social and political tensions could rise as inequality over access to heat and food grows sharper. The very idea of an ice age in the middle of a warming world is jarring, but it speaks to the complexity of Earth's systems. Global warming does not mean uniform warming everywhere, it means instability, with some regions baking while others freeze. The appearance of the cold blob and the documented weakening of the AMOC are warnings that feedback loops can have surprising results. The last comparable event, the Younger Dryas about 12,000 years ago, plunged Europe into centuries of cold when meltwater disrupted the same circulation. Humanity was a tiny population of hunter-gatherers then. Today, billions depend on stable climates for food and trade. If the projections hold true, the next few decades will be decisive. The AMOC's fate will depend on how much ice melts, how fast greenhouse gases continue to build, and whether humanity can slow or reverse its impact. But as Maguire notes, current policies make optimism difficult. Emissions are rising, not falling. Targets like the Paris Agreement's 1.5 degrees Celsius limit are slipping away. Some experts think we could be headed for 3 degrees Celsius or more of warming by 2100, a level that could destabilize multiple climate systems at once. For now, the cold blob off Greenland is just a patch of frigid water in a warming ocean. But if it grows, if it continues to dilute the Atlantic, it could be the harbinger of a Europe transformed. London under snowdrifts, Scotland as an Arctic outpost, Scandinavian cities locked in permafrost. These are no longer fantasies, but modeled possibilities. The AMOC's collapse would not just rewrite Europe's weather, it would redraw maps of habitability and force societies to rethink everything from farming, to housing, to governance. In this paradoxical future, the richest irony is that it would still be our fault. Human activities, the burning of fossil fuels, the clearing of forests, the industrial scale of consumption are what have melted the ice, freshened the seas, and pushed the Atlantic's conveyor belt toward failure. The ocean has warned us with a cold spot in a warming world, a signal that nature's systems are not infinitely forgiving. Whether we listen or not could determine whether our descendants walk on frozen Thames bridges or remember them only as a cautionary tale.